Hey, Carl.
Hey, everybody.
Will they also be able to choose their origination dates going forward?
Yes, what we're going to try to do is.
Too many Zoom calls. I was just watching Senator Schumer in the background there during the Quality of Life meeting. He was talking about the restaurant industry.
Keep hearing restaurateurs say, how do we make it with half or 25% of the seats?
I think they were just talking about, you know, further amendments to the legislation to address some of those issues.
Are you same seat, or is that a virtual background that you have and move around?
Behind me? Behind me? No, no,
Is that real or virtual?
That's not virtual.
Oh, you learned how to touch a virtual background. Very good.
Is Amy with us? I don't see.
Amy will not be joining us tonight.
Oh, she's not. Okay,
so because she's held up. So I'm
our,
counting. 1 second.
On our quorum.
We do have quorum.
Okay, great. We still have some people who are joining us. Tonight is, what's the date today? Today is our May 11th Executive Committee meeting for Community Board 2. I'm going to propose the agenda is the same as the last few, which is District Manager's report, Chair's report, any committee updates, old business and new business. Is that sound acceptable to everybody? Does anybody want to modify that? Okay, second?
Second.
Yes, okay, all right, so that's our agenda for the evening. Bob, do you want to start us off?
Sure. So as some of you, maybe all of you to different extents are aware, we're always kind of at some point in the city's budget process. We are really kind of at usually I bring this up at our executive meetings in June or July, certainly by August and September, because in October, as the committee chairs know, we have to get together our budget priorities and update our district needs statement. Well in advance of that, there's kind of grumblings or mumblings or among the district managers and the Mayor's Office of Management and Budget. And just today, actually, I was sent an email that was forwarded to me by the district manager of CB1, which contained, it was an email containing attachments for several city agencies. And if you click on those attachments, it contains links to city agency websites, to the New York City Council's Finance Division's report on a particular agency, and a link to the Mayor's Management Report on that agency. So just 10 or 15 minutes ago, I forwarded that email to all the committee chairs whose committees oversee or have purview over one or more of those agencies. The reason I did that was, well, the link to the agency websites that's an easy one. But I had a feeling that not too many people, myself included, look on any kind of regular basis at the New York City Council's Finance Division's reports on the respective city agencies. And I thought it might be helpful just in informing you as you go forward and have meetings in the coming months, and even more particularly as we get into the fall and we start to consider budget requests and budget priorities. The Mayor's Management Report is probably something that's maybe a little more familiar to you, but that's attached to, and that also has a lot of useful information. So I sent that, as I said, maybe I should send it to all the CB2 members because they might find it interesting, but particularly the committee chairs. I think if you get a chance to take a look at that, it might be helpful in the coming months. And just so you know, so where we are in this process among the district managers, we're just getting organized. We're picking committees. We'll be meeting in the next month or two to come up with questions for the agencies when we meet with them in September for what's called the borough budget consultation meetings. And we ask them we just lay out an agenda of projects, borough-wide projects of interest to the various community boards. So the chairs who received my email before, if you have any questions, feel free to call me or email me. I'll answer them as best I can. Secondly, something I probably also bring up in later months, but it was mentioned in the OMB email that I got, so I'm going to bring it up. District consultation meetings. All the community boards are invited to meet with representatives from city agencies to talk about projects within their districts. Really the only chair, and for some committees it may not be as necessary or as useful as other committees. I think that a lot of the committee chairs have good direct relationships with representatives from the agencies. They don't need these extraordinary or these extra meetings. Every year, Shirley, I don't know if Shirley's on here somewhere. Shirley and I usually meet with DOT, and I think Shirley has always found that. I've certainly found them interesting and helpful in deciding how to set some of our budget requests and budget priorities. So, but we don't need to wait till the fall. I think a lot within the scheme of the annual budget schedule. I think they kind of invite community boards to have these meetings in May and June. So if any committee chairs are interested in doing that, I would suggest maybe take a look at our budget requests from last year, the responses the agencies gave us, and we can set up a meeting with the agency and talk about how they responded to our requests. And that's about it.
Bob, I have a dumb question. Where would we see the budget priority the responses to the budget priority requests again?
Go to the website. It's on our website. If you click on the budget register, it'll have the right next to our request will be the agency response. And some of them are just boilerplate, kind of almost meaningless answers. They don't really tell us anything, but that's something we could ask them about. But that's where you'll find it. Okay. That's it.
All right. Thanks, Bob. So earlier today, Bob and I talked to Hannah Dubin from the group Forward about doing our board trading along with Susan Kent. And we're going to do it either on the evening of the 27th, May 27th or May 28th. Does anybody have any preference or interest in one night or the other? And if you guys had remembered, because we were going to do this prior to everything starting with COVID, that the request had been that all the committee chairs and vice chairs and executive committee members could make the training. So I don't know if there's a preference for that Wednesday or Thursday, or if anybody. So I don't see anybody with.
I typed in.
Okay.
Obviously, selfish chat. I prefer Thursday.
All right, Thursday. Well, then, anybody else have a problem with Thursday?
Thursday, I may not be able to attend. I know
Okay.
Wednesday's fine.
All right. Let me. Bob and I will discuss. We hadn't fully looked at everything else on the agendas, but so basically, it looks like we have one person with a conflict for each of those. Okay. Okay. All right. And so it looks like we had a good discussion, and she's very familiar with doing trainings using Zoom, and I think it'd be very productive for everybody actually using the Zoom format, because I think it's a little bit smoother in some respects. So we will let you know. Excuse me?
Well,
You cut out there for me.
oh, at what time is the training?
Oh, it's 6:30, our regular start time, and it would be an hour and a half with a break in the middle, so it'd probably work out to be an hour and 45 minutes, or somewhere in that time frame as far as the time. And then so far this week, we've already had a quality of life meeting tonight, which most of you probably weren't aware of, but that was from 6 to 6:30. Joe was ran a great meeting for that. They had one applicant, so that worked out great. Schools and Education Committee is meeting tomorrow. They've got a great section on that. It starts at 5:30, but at 6:30, remote learning and planning in fall 2020. You guys have lined up 6 different principles, which is pretty great. I think that's going to be a interesting discussion, I presume. The land use meeting on Wednesday has been canceled. Landmarks on Thursday. I think we're still missing one of the questionnaires. I think there are 2 items though on the agenda. Bob has sent out an email earlier today with respect covering our updated agendas and also discussing the Open Streets program and a link to the NoHo and the NoHo bid and the Soho Broadway initiative are doing a webinar tomorrow on conversation about commercial leases, which I think would be very of interest to business owners. I think it sounds pretty interesting, and I think they're going to dive into a lot of the topics that are actually facing our local businesses here and the unique circumstances in New York City. So I think that should be pretty interesting. We discussed last week, and I think solidified for elected speaking at our board meetings. If the principal elected is there, they'll have 5 minutes. If the rep is there, it's 2 minutes. We'll try and have their reports all set up to just put directly in the chat so people can link to them directly. It's not problematic. And if they've got anything else they want to put in chat, they need to be all set to do that. That should streamline our full board meetings a bit. And then as far as questions from board members, they can be quick questions that with quick answers, but not long questions. I just don't think if we're having the opportunity to have all of our electeds actually join us, we need to use their time and our time, in a respectful way so that our meetings don't go on as long. I know Brian is probably happy about that because he was not happy getting to the business section so late at the full board meeting. So, and that's a point that we should be keeping in mind. I also mentioned that to Hannah Dubin as far as something to discuss during the training sessions, tips for moving the meetings along. One of the things that Valerie had sort of mentioned to me that we're not, the chat function is a great way to provide follow-up information while somebody is speaking so that you don't need to keep giving more and more details. And so that's something I think, in the future, we want to utilize that a little bit more to just move things along. I got an update just came up at the traffic and transportation meeting on the lower part of 6th Avenue between Canal and Watts. That's being used by the COVID-19 task force, and that's their command center there. So as far as our requests for the bike lanes there, that might require a little bit more conversations as far as since they seem to have taken up shop in that section as their operations center, and I guess they're also on Thompson Street as well. The Open Streets program has already begun, or at least will be beginning in Gansevoort in the meatpacking bid. I talked to Detective Jackson, and so I guess Little West 12th and Gansevoort, he had not been up there to take a look, but they had dropped off the barriers. And I guess that's going to be from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., but I don't have he wasn't positive about that. This weekend was a little bit colder, but they had 20 cops out at Pier 45 and Pier 47, put barricades up, I guess. I did not go out there and see it myself to limit the number of people that can go out there. I guess next weekend, the weather's going to be a lot warmer, and so they probably have a little, I guess this weekend was a dry run for that with a little bit colder temperatures. The details, they expect the detail will probably be in place for a while, just given the conversations that have come up around that. Washington Square Park was a little lighter than normal this past weekend as far as operations there. There were no 311 complaints with respect to Washington Square Park of any weight. The numbers in the 6th precinct are a little bit up on burglaries. I think that's everything that I wanted to cover. And then the one other item that we said we we're going to discuss is Dan with West Street. And I think that you had some updates on that, right? As far as you sent out an email, it looks like they're starting work.
Well, yeah, I mean, actually, they pulled up the cones around 4:30 today. No one gave any answers about what it was for, but it looked as though they were starting the road restoration. But if anybody goes over there right now, the cones have been lifted. You know, we were going to write a resolution about taking a lane or potentially more than that for bikes and for runners, but I think we just need to be clear on what are we asking for and what's the purpose? Are we going to ask only runners go on the Greenway and bikes go on West Street? And if we can, I don't know, come to some kind of clarity on that, then I think it's worthwhile requesting it. But I think it actually has to be open for discussion because in Rich's Parks and Waterfront meeting, it came up and there was questions on whether runners and cyclists can actually share the West Street lane. And I just think that we may want to open it up for discussion. And this is something really that I would look to Rich and to Shirley to kind of coordinate.
So just for clarification, I've never seen sort of a bike path ever shared with runners. So I'm just a little unclear what.
Well, the bike path right now is shared with runners. So the Greenway is dual running and bikes. So that's the way it works right now.
Yeah.
And then the other issue that I thought about a little earlier today, because I was thinking about the legislation that they passed. One of the that they were discussing. One of the other pieces of the legislation was the liability, that they were trying to lift the liability from Hudson River Park on the Greenway, which made me think about, you know, putting in a 3-way bike lane on West Street. I mean, does that issue itself negate this, or is that?
Well, the bikeway itself is not part of Hudson River Park. That is New York State Department of Transportation. So it's always been a little, the Greenway, where the bikeway is.
Right. Okay.
That's considered the Greenway, the bikeway, whatever. It is actually considered a major artery for bikes. That actually is not part of Hudson River Park. So the whole idea that Hudson River Park could get sued for an area that it has no jurisdiction over was kind of what the bone of contention was. And I think recently they actually were given protection when it came to insurance. But so I hope does that clarify it?
Yeah, no, that does, because I had thought that was part of the park just because of that legislation.
It's not part of the park, and obviously West Street wouldn't be part of the park either.
Right. I mean, yeah, I was going to say, I mean, do we, if we delay this further, this might not get into their planning, and that's sort of one of my concerns. And I mean, do we run a risk if we say a safe bikeway on West Street? You know, they're not going to set up an unsafe one. Have runners on the Greenway and walkers in the park. I mean, are we going to get to a different conclusion than that if we?
I don't think we should. I just think it needs to be discussed. I just didn't want to write something up that I threw in my own personal opinions, and I'd rather get some feedback. So if we feel as though making a recommendation that high-speed runners would be on the Greenway, cyclists should go to West Street, and we have signage that actually declares such a thing so that it's not optional, it's actually mandatory that these initiatives happen, at least during any of the measures associated with the coronavirus. I'm happy to write that up. Right now, what Jeffrey wrote up, who's the current chair of the Hudson River Park Advisory Council, just requested it without any kind of directives whatsoever. Actually also requested that they suspend the road repair restoration as well, which I think, you know, we might be in agreement with. I think that this is the forum to say, okay, this is what, Daniel, you should write, or we should leave it to committee so that committee can actually speak about it with public input. I'm not sure. I'm pulled in both directions.
Yeah. Okay. I have a number of people who wanted to comment. Janet.
This was actually, I'll defer to Shirley to discuss whether or not to have this committee. But this is rolling back to something earlier you said about the cops in the park. Washington Square Park, the cops are driving their cars around the park. They're usually, like I walk through there are 2 cars, there are 3 cars. It's like, it's just, this seems to be the worst way to police a small park. They should be walking around the park and the cars should be parked on the street. So I don't know, is there anything we can do about that? I mean, it's just.
Yeah, I'll reach out and actually after our meeting tonight, I'll call Detective Jackson and ask him about that. It may be that these are like the sector response cars that are being tasked to the park when they're not responding to calls because there are a lot less calls. Or if they're actually detailed to the park, I agree with you. They should be on, should be on.
I can send you a series of pictures and they show their cars, they're just driving.
Yeah, and
all around the park.
I saw it too, and I saw when they came down or were handing out masks last weekend, they were doing that. And you're right. I mean, it's parking right in front of the archway, in front of the arch. I mean, that's a good point. I'll ask them about that.
Okay, yeah, it seems kind of ludicrous. So that was what that was about. The Westway, I mean, that's really to defer to Shirley, but I think I would second what you proposed. That it seems simple enough to have the bikes on the highway and the runners on the greenway, and it seems like a fairly easy segregation.
Yeah, Shirley, I see you have your hand up. Do you want to comment?
Well, yes, just adding to that conversation, in view of the concern about the runners, obviously you want to keep them separated from the bike riders. You had brought up something, Carter, which I think makes some sense, and maybe it's something we should be thinking about, that maybe we need more than just one lane, and at least a lane and a half. And how do you feel about that, Dan?
Yeah, I think that's a bad idea. I'm sending you guys pictures. There's only, if you take out 1 lane, it leaves it to 2. And if there was a traffic jam with that, if you take out 2 lanes, because the left lane is for turning traffic, I think it's going to be a nightmare, especially that it's a major artery. So I feel like it wouldn't work with taking out 2. They'd be taking out 2/3 of the travel lanes. I think that's a little bit extreme.
Yeah, I just thought that 1 lane just wasn't wide enough by the time you put the barriers in to have enough room for a 2-way bike lane. But I was talking about this with Joe. I mean, each lane, north and south, when you have bikes facing each other, really you need a little, in most areas you have a little out of some sort on the sides, whether it's a little bit of elbow room. And if it's on the highway with cars right next to you, not having that elbow room just strikes me. But I don't know what the prescriptions are for the bike lane widths. And
well, I think the bike lane where
the travel lane there.
It's, I think the bike lane where it is right at Morton, where I took those pictures and showed it to, is actually a little bit wider than 1 lane. But if you go up by Chelsea Piers, it's a lot thinner, and people do manage. Especially I think you're right, though, you'd need to have some kind of protection from the cars. I'm not sure you'd need protections from bikes going in either direction. I think it's wide enough. 1 lane is wide enough to manage bikes going in opposite directions.
Yeah. It's 11 feet. Car lane is a good 11 feet.
11 feet.
This is
that
wide.
Would be about 5.5 each way.
Well, I was just thinking about it.
Bike rider, you're the bike riders. Is that sufficient, do you feel?
I think so. I don't think we have 11 feet in the greenway.
Yeah, I wasn't sure. I mean, that's where I just, because if they use, it also depends. I was thinking more, it depends on the materials that they use to construct a temporary bike lane and the width of that versus a travel lane, et cetera. But, but nevertheless, I think we might just want to get this out to them, because if they're going to object, they're going to object.
Yeah, I agree. We got to do
There's not much
something.
we can do. And I think it makes sense if they can figure out how to make it work. They're going to do it safely. And I just want to get it in front of them while they still have some discretionary budget left to cover this, and put the meeting, just put it in front of them. And if it doesn't work, it's not going to work. And I don't think us having meetings is going to change that. And I don't see that having it shared bicyclists and pedestrians would ever, even now it sort of strikes me as that seems like a disaster waiting to happen. If it's going to be our primary outdoor space, you know, because it seems to be, because they're closing everything else down for the summer. I don't know, but I leave that. I mean, Dan, do you think we're going to get any other input?
I'm happy to write something where we say we want cyclists on West Street in both directions and a barrier to protect it from the road vehicles, from cars, and with a recommendation that runners get the greenway. And this, I'm happy doing that, taking Jeffrey's and Bob and my letter that we wrote to the governor and taking it one step further with this recommendation, if everybody agrees. And there are a couple of other recommendations in there too, on why the park's getting more crowded and how it's an essential part of New York, and you know, and social distancing and runners having 18-foot spread on their saliva. There's a lot of different little small things in there. But I think moving it out to West Street really makes sense, and asking cyclists to go there, if everybody agrees.
The other thing I think would be important is if we know they're going to be doing construction, that they keep in mind that they don't necessarily have to do the whole park with the bike lane if they're repairing sections of West Street. So if they get to, you know, if they finish the lower, you know, let's say they're done with Battery to 14th Street, that they can implement it there sooner.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, today they were only working on Morton to Canal. So it was actually all the lanes beyond that were open. That's why you saw that buildup of traffic, because people were, you know, going from 3 to 2. But yes, I think that's actually a worthy suggestion as well.
It's also kind of crazy that they're setting up and taking down the cones every day to do the work instead of just doing the work. You know, but
maybe it almost seemed like it was a test today. Like nobody was out there. It was a test. There was a sign blocking off traffic. It just. Oh,
okay, right.
It wasn't like there was no work that I could see getting done.
So I guess I'll make a motion to write a letter as described by Dan that's coming from the executive committee. Is there actually I have a couple? Does anybody else want to speak on this? Brian, did you want to speak on this?
Well, just on Hudson River Park. The work on the West Street has been minor. They're not tearing up the street or something like that. They're not repaving. They're just maybe repairing the construction joints. So it would seem to be pretty flexible and something we could work around. And the other thing is that over the weekend, the police were out there on foot and working and talking to people that were congregating. And generally speaking, the photographs are misleading that you see in the media, because from a distance, or when a photograph shows a length of the park, you can't tell how much distance there is between. Every time I've been out there, and I go out there daily, there's been plenty of space between people, except for families, of course. And then finally, this morning, my wife went out and the police were handing out masks, and I just want to commend them for that. So my chat comment was that there's no signage for runners to be on the bikeway. It never has been, and never was meant to be that way, although runners do very egotistically take that because there are fewer obstructions for them. But if they do move out to the West Street, then that would be a pretty good solution. And if you look at Allen or Christie Street, two-way bike lanes, it's very narrow. I would say maybe 6 feet wide. So there's plenty of room for a two-way bike lane and still be safe. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks, Robin.
Yeah, I'm all for getting this out there now, because it's gonna, we need to get this going and up and running. I think West Street agreed both ways. Bicyclists, I've seen mostly really good cyclists, and even on the Greenway now and those narrow spots that Janet brought up, and, people are, when you're behind a slow person, you're going in the wrong lane to get past them. And so I think West Street should be wide enough. And I'm also thinking we want to start training the cars now, because eventually New York City will reopen. I'd love to get the traffic trained to the idea that there are cyclists before we start getting a large amount of cars back. It's going to be a while before I'm going to feel safe to take the subway. So I definitely want to feel like there's this option to take, have an exclusive bike route uptown. And on a side note, sort of related, it would be great if, I guess it's the DOT, could be a little bit like checking out the various bike lanes that there's lots of repaving, there's a lot of potholes and bumps not in the park, but like I go up 8th Avenue now and down 7th, up Hudson. There's just lots of, if bicycling is going to be more of a mode of transportation for the foreseeable future, it would be nice if they made it a little bit more, a smooth sailing, if they have the money in the budget, or, to look at those very big problem spots on the bike paths so there aren't any, blowouts or whatever. But let's get this going.
I wish that would happen, but I think people have been asking for that for some time, but it is.
I know. Yeah. I mean, I just think only because I think the volume of people using bikes now, I mean, I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying it for the health reasons, and just, and just, I don't want to go on the subway, and it's going to be, so I think they should, be thoughtful now about fixing those real problem spots.
Great. Thanks. Rich?
Yeah, a couple of things. First, we also have to think about skaters. There are people that do skate down there. And I don't think there are signs that are, that are posted on poles, but there are graphics on the asphalt that says bikes here, runners here. So there is an expectation that runners are going to be on the Greenway. But that was to Brian's point. Runners are allowed on the Greenway. There are markings on the ground to suggest where they should go if it's tight, and they're bikers as well. The other point, though, is a great deal of money was spent to put those bollards in every crossing area. And that was done for safety because of the terrorist action where the person rode the car onto the bike lane. We're basically ignoring that now. We're saying put the bikes on the road. And so all that effort that went in, and all of what is kind of a pain when you're riding bikes, it's pretty narrow to get through those things. That'll all be ignored. So what I think you'll end up seeing is, bikes going faster on the street than they do now because they won't have to stop periodically. But I think it's important to note, unless they're going to put up some sort of cones to separate or do something to stop cars from going in that lane, we are exposed to that risk again. Not that it's a reason to stop this initiative, but there's a lot of time and money spent on putting those dividers in.
Right.
I think it's worth noting that seems to, that is being ignored or over, is being ignored in this case.
I kind of look at these are all temporary measures through October, really. Outdoor season for right now. I mean, it's and
I guess that's true. Yeah.
Because just to Robin's point, how this is going to open up in the city and how that's going to look, I think, is anyone's.
No, that's a really Robin's point is right.
I just want to also point. I wouldn't mind if it were permanent. I mean, look what happened with Bloomberg and Times Square and all that stuff, and the cabs are freaking out because they were. There's lots of places that are cut off to cars in the Times Square area, and they figured it out, and it's more of an open space for better or for worse, and the cartoon characters or whatever. But overall, it's probably successful, and it stayed permanently. So
this is going to be when there's traffic for the Holland Tunnel. This is not going to be well received when people are sitting in traffic and because they're, it's tighter.
But are we really going to have the same amount of traffic for the foreseeable future? Is it going to be like instantaneously the same volume?
Yeah, because as you said, I don't think people like taking mass transit.
Yeah.
That's the big difference.
There's going to be some changes. Patricia?
Hi, to Robin's point, regarding the potholes, everyone should download that 311 app and use it wherever you see
Good call.
That's the only way things are going to get fixed. Because there, you can take photos and document and hit send, and that's an actual record that someone has to look at, and it goes to the appropriate agencies. Just to tell everyone, use it when you can.
Yeah, that's a great point. Susanna.
I was just going to add to Rich's point that I think it's a moving target. You know, I mean, cars have been going up West Street at 50 miles an hour. I don't know what kind of barrier you can create so that a cyclist feels close, you know, feels safe going close to those cars. And I think that and it's a major artery, you know, when it's not like the crossings at Times Square or at Herald Square, it's a major artery. So it's great I think we should do it and ask for it now. And I think that we should also expect that everything's going to change really fast. Or not.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, but this uncomfortableness with public transit is going to yield, and I'm sure anybody who's worked at any big companies and having these conversations about moving their employees around, you know, whether it's buses and van services to make people just comfortable. And that may transition the way we see some of our streets used.
Right.
And you know, that's just, and West Street is the major moving point of north-south, might be where a lot of that is funneled and then into the tunnels. I mean, I don't know. That's just, I only recently started thinking about that because I have yet to meet anybody who lives outside of the city who's going to be comfortable taking a train in, right, then coming into Grand Central or Penn Station and getting in a subway. I mean, that's a huge hurdle. And so it's going to be interesting. But can I make a motion that we send a letter with what we've described? And is everybody in agreement from that coming from the executive committee?
Yep.
And then I guess Dan will direct that to the governor and to the trust and asking them to explore options.
Sounds good. So what are we going to talk about speeding cars or barriers protect from terrorism? Do I even mention that, or we just leave it out?
No, I don't know.
I think they should just leave them where they are. And I mean, and then for the bike lane, it's temporary, right?
Yeah. I mean, but not have one in the bike lane is what he's saying. They'll leave them where they are, of course, but there won't be the equivalent in the bike lane. And you know,
I understand what you're. Okay,
people in the bike lane are at risk of someone wanting to just drive down and hit them. But I can't think of a way to put anything in the street, Dan, that would be effective.
Right. Neither do I.
Cone wouldn't help.
And if that's an impediment, because, you know, those bollards were put in at the decision of the state, correct? So it's, you know, if they need that, if they feel that's a requirement, you know, and they decide not to do this, so be it. But we don't want them to put it in at the moment.
No.
That seems like
they're offensive.
Yeah. Unless a car drives down the
Yeah, well, we walk up.
Well, yeah, what happens when, I mean, a cone's not going to protect a cyclist with a car going 50 miles an hour. I think that's a really good point. I mean,
But I think that's where we leave that up to the state DOT to make that determination. I mean, if they don't feel safe with it, then they're not going to do it. And
It
you know,
won't
they may
get
have
bogged down now. This is not going to happen. You have to move it forward.
Yeah, and I think that all this question of open streets, it's a really great experiment taking advantage of the situation that we're in, but I think we all have to recognize that that things are going to change very quickly. And actually, if people are taking less mass transit, they might be taking more cars and there might be less cycling. It's hard to know. So I suspect that both the state transportation and the park and everyone will be gauging this as we go, and things might change quickly. So I think it's better for us to get it out there earlier than later, because this is the
everybody's in agreement. Why don't we vote on that?
We just raise our hand.
The executive committee. I guess we'll vote by the attendance and I guess everybody has their hand. Valerie, I'll let you run the vote since you're going to be the one recording.
Okay.
So everybody has their hands raised for yes. And now, can I have everybody raise their hands for no, if anybody is against this? So I don't see any hands against it. Are there any abstentions or recusals? I don't, am I missing anybody? Wait, Joe, are you abstaining or recusing? Oh, no, he's not. Okay.
Just
he's
silent
all right.
thumb.
Okay, so I don't see any abstentions or recusals and no votes, so it's unanimous in favor. Okay, and were there any other updates from any other committees? If anybody wanted to?
I have a question on a committee question.
Sure, go ahead.
This is for another meeting. Do you just want history right now?
Oh, sure. Sure, go ahead.
Because I don't know if this is out of order, but we discussed it. Came up through an email doing a joint meeting with economic development, quality of life, and transportation, and to talk about new uses of street space that are coming up at this particular time. To take more space so restaurants can put some tables outside and kind of creative solution to help our small businesses.
Yeah, I'm gonna be putting together a task force, the committee chairs that address those, and basically we're gonna just come up with a very slimmed down, basically what we believe in as sort of as a community on those issues, so that can afford guidance to the various offices, because they're, it's very unclear how that's done, but typically a lot of this is, you already have the licensed sidewalk cafe spaces, we already have street fairs and stuff like that are licensed. So most of this will be handled through some aspect of the city licensing things, and then overlaid with the Department of Health, putting tables out. So we basically just putting together the types of things that we already approve, and allowing that, have a discussion on those instead of doing it the opposite way. So
are you in putting together a task force now, or you're going to do it in the future?
Probably in the next week or two. I mean, as far as we get a little bit more direction, I mean, it doesn't, the restaurant industry doesn't look like things are going to be changing for dining. And that's really what this would be addressing, and especially in the city. And I think that the experiences of other cities is really going to inform some of the procedures for this. And that's starting to happen right now. And I think we're going to have a little bit more clarity on that. And also outside of New York, many places have the options of their parking lots, that spaces that they specifically control. And that's something in the city, there's a lot of cross regulations on those types of things. Restaurants make most of their money on alcohol and desserts. So there really needs to be some crossover areas, and looking at the different licenses and how that might all interconnect into the easiest way if somebody's interested in doing something. And also the ideas that, that you've seen, like with Dinner on 8th, you see on the Mulberry Mall, those have all worked very well from the different agencies and licensing aspects. And so we've got some models about how we can put forward some ideas, and saying that we're in support of exploration of those. Because once the warm weather hits, it's something that's going to have to roll out very quickly if they do allow dining. And so it's not really that complicated. We need to make it comfortable for the residents in our community to go and support our businesses, because I don't think many people are going to be coming to do that. So, that's
So will you have, will Joe and Shirley and I be part of this task force?
I'm going to decide on that in the next week or two. That's where I'm just having some clarity on how that's, how it looks in some of the other areas about what, and I've been talking to some of the people in the New York state industry and some of their lobbyists as well about it, and sort of what they're seeing and what they're asking for, just so everybody can be on the same page so it moves quickly. I mean, that's the most important thing, is that this moves quickly so that everybody understands that there's support for, how this will look, so they can use their energy, efficiently. There's not too many ways that it can be done. A lot of it is just working out the kinks. It's just like the open streets. You need to start with the idea, get that going, and then work it out as it moves forward. And the other big question is, is that enough revenue for a lot of our restaurants to even open their doors? And I think that that's a question that people are still looking at. I was watching a part of Senator Schumer's call tonight with restaurants in the beginning, and I think that's the federal legislation, restaurant bailout specifically. There's a lot of overlapping issues there to just sort of understand, how that's all going to look, I guess.
Tampa, Florida, evidently just started that kind of program.
Yeah. And also the other issue is finding, equity, so that, and this is sort of some of the complications that can be really smoothed out if we just show support for an extension of a premise, even if it's a block or two away from where the business is located. That's an important part, because we have a lot of businesses that would not be appropriate to open right in front of their establishment, but that wouldn't preclude them from being around the corner or on another block. And a lot of the current laws are written with the extension of premises in mind. And so when you start moving things away, you really need support of a lot of areas to smooth that over quickly. And that's sort of where we can come up with some concepts of what, as a community, we're okay with and what we're not. And I know that Joe's committee and Donna and Bob, it's like, everybody, we've talked about these. We know very rough parameters of where the objections start beginning and where they aren't. And I think the industry is very well aware of that, and they're reasonable as well. So I'd rather just put together something quickly, then have public comments on it, and put something in front of the full board when we can. I don't think it's really that complicated. It seems complicated, but not when you realize that during the warmer weather, we're the ones who are going to be supporting our local businesses here, the people who live here. And so that's, we've got to make it comfortable for the people who live here to go out. And I don't think it's
Question sort of on this topic. What's going on with how does the food truck environment fit into all this? Not long before this all imploded, there was we had some visitors who, to one of our full board meetings, talking about food truck, all the light, all the hoops you have to jump through, and I don't know where that ended up. But then I'm wondering, that whole ecosystem, how do they fit into this? Are they allowed to open? Are they considered?
I don't know. Does anybody know the answer to that? I mean, they have to go to their commissaries and clean. So the commissaries are also around people, but I'm not sure they're considered essential businesses. That might be the answer of why.
But eventually, when as part of the phases, and are they considered part of the restaurant phase? Yeah, I mean they are also what is part. I know there's some controversy about the volume of them, but I find that they are also something that makes New York unique, and it's also a way to buy something interesting that's more affordable than going to a high-end restaurant.
I think we need to worry about getting our regular businesses open, and I think that's they'll figure that out. But we've a lot of our own brick and mortar companies that are here. We've got to figure out what we can do with those who are already in our community.
Right, but how does that affect the food trucks that used to be able to come to the neighborhood?
It would hurt the food trucks.
Yeah, I mean,
Cart, I just want to add one thing, because I've spoken to some retailers, and they feel as though moving parking out to allow for pickup is really important to businesses, because people, in order to keep the brick and mortars open, people are going to want to drive down, pick up their jewelry, pick up whatever they're ordering, and having it delivered from the store. So this is something for traffic and transportation as well as economic development. And how do we clear areas so that people can actually keep these stores going with a pickup drop-off zone?
Yeah, I mean, it's something we're gonna have to figure out, because the flip side is that a lot of people who come in here are going to be driving too, and so that's really requires quite a bit of thinking about that. It's a lot of shared use of the streets, because again, the people coming in to our community who have used, public transportation, whether it's any of the trains, the subways, they're not going to be comfortable doing that. And without knowing what, even remotely what that looks like, it's hard to plan,
Well, it is a citywide problem, so.
Well, it's a citywide problem, but we really rely tremendously in our community on a huge amount of visitors that basically for all of our street level businesses, which are not office workers. And so it's a lot of weekend business. It's a lot of people coming in. And so that's, it's going to be interesting to figure that out. But that's an interesting point, Dan. I mean, that's, I saw on West 3rd, we've got a drive-through espresso restaurant at Zinc. And, they're doing where people can just pull up and stop. And I mean, there's not enough traffic, I think, right now that's impeding anything, but it's.
Well, we're very fortunate because that's the most inefficient way to move a person around. So you see lines in the city, and you see lines at the farmer's market or lines at Cinderella, and it's human beings standing 6 feet apart. We cannot accommodate a line of 15 cars for a store. Like that is simply, we do not have the space to have vehicular lines for our retail shop.
I don't think that that's the type of store I'm talking about, Janet. I'm talking about, for instance, I talked to the CEO of John Hardy and talked to her about an open streak on Spring and said that would absolutely kill all the retail on Spring. They're not having they don't have 20 customers come in. They have a customer here and there. And if we make it very difficult for a customer to buy an object and pick it up at a store, I think that's one of the things we just have to consider. It's something that has been mentioned to me more than one occasion.
But the shared streets would allow local traffic, that they were totally allow a car to come in and pick up something.
But this is exactly the type of conversation, it's like that we see our retailers having, is they think that people are coming to visit them, but not sure if anybody before September is going to be driving into New York City and coming here during the summer. And that's really the part about why it's our own community needs to be comfortable, patronizing our local businesses. Because just to Janet's point, it's like, how do you make something comfortable so people can line up? If you have two businesses next door to each other, I mean, how does that even work? Of who gets the space to line people up? Or, the Trader Joe's wine shop and food store. I mean, they have the line ran in a U for both of them, and there are 60 people in line for both of them. And so it is a challenging, point of trying to figure that out. And it's, but the deliveries and the pickups, if it's done electronically, it seems to be working pretty efficiently. It's just nobody's waiting around too long. So I haven't noticed any of that remotely being an issue, but I guess it's something that, we can start thinking about how that might work. But that's a good point, Dan, because so they don't want the street closed off because they rely on it for movement. And then the flip side, a restaurant that might want to put out some tables and chairs out in front, would be the competition. And how do you share that space with pedestrians and bicyclists?
Yes, these are things we have to create a nice balance for. I mean, I agree with you, Jan. I'd much prefer to have a safe street, but if retailers are saying that's going to kill their business, we just have to listen to it, and that's what you're going to hear. Most of the folks that are going to be coming to your meeting are going to be those types of retailers that are not open right now, and they're trying to figure out what are we going to do when we open. So grocery stores and pharmacies, those stores are open now, and they're handling foot traffic. This is a different type of retailer.
I mean, and this is destination retail, and that's really, I don't know, that's not, I'm not sure that's jumping back soon, but I could be wrong. Maybe people are missing, beautiful silver bracelets and, ordering them online isn't enough. So that may be, or somebody wants something for, an anniversary gift for the tomorrow. Yeah, Shirley, I see.
That's an old retail story. That's an old, the ordering versus in person. I think that it's possible we'll find that people will be really excited to walk out on the street and go into a store. New Yorkers have never really done that by car. They've done that in person. And then we have the bike brigades who deliver all the food and everything. So it's kind of hard to see. It's kind of hard to guess what the implications are for vehicular traffic.
And I want to add one more thing, and that retailers have always complained that they have to keep their doors closed. They can't have the air conditioning. And now that we're in the age of the virus, we all know that circulation is so important, that opening the windows and doors really will help our retailers. It'll be more inviting. Even if there is no more than 4 people in a store, that's something that you're also going to hear, Janet, when we have a meeting that discusses opening up for retailers, is keeping up the doors open too.
All right, well, they could probably adjust their air conditioning so it wasn't Arctic.
That's not the point. That's not the point. The point is that when you have a very expensive store, people are afraid to walk in because it's intimidating. We heard this over and over again in testimony in the committee.
Well, they still wouldn't be walking into the stores, right? I mean, they'd be ordering and picking up, no?
It's also the door, the door touching situation as well. Most of those are not automatic doors.
That's right. That was brought up as well, touching the doors.
It's also possible that the enforcement of that air conditioning rule just won't happen as much.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or that's included in some sort of resolution.
I mean, one of the things is that if we're, and this is where and this was brought up a little earlier with something else, it's like, being a little too prescriptive, it stymies the ideas. And what we want to do is say what we are okay with, not what we're not okay with. And that allows sort of the movement as we go through figuring these things out over the next 4 or 5 months, how that's going to work. And that's what, we can always find a lot of impediments. Look, it's easy. You can't open the door. You put out a thing of sanitizing wipes out front and everybody can take one out and open the door. I mean, put a garbage can inside. There are ways that creatively you can move past these things. They're not going to be unique to any individual store. It's going to be unique to going out. And, if your door propped open is something you need to do, I don't think anybody's going to say close your door right now. But we want to make sure there's the room for the flexibility of whatever is going to work for businesses that are choosing to open their doors. I mean, that's just, to me, that seems to be the biggest point, because I think that there are going to be a lot of decisions to make after they open their doors, of how that's going to work. I mean, I was talking with somebody who lives uptown, and they were talking about Broadway and Soho. And if you limit the number of people in stores, but you've got a destination store, which store gets to have 60 people out front? And you can't run 4 different stores with 60 people out front all next to each other. I mean, so there's a lot of more discussion to come out. And I think that there'd be some creativity. We just don't want to say, here's our opinion, and then 3 weeks later, somebody figures out a way around it, and we've locked too tight of a position in. So
I don't know that we should have an opinion on how stores do their work. Let's just wait and see what happens. I mean, what opinion? Who's going to read our?
But and that Susanna, and that was to my point, which was for the eating and drinking, is that there are some cross-regulatory areas which are different, and I didn't want to cross them into each other. Specifically for that point, is to keep this really, on the very the narrowness of the way the laws are written, to allow the governor and the mayor who have executive powers to make changes, to give them the latitude and say that we're supportive of that, so that whatever they figure out is the way they can do it, they can do it. And but it's a bit of a challenge with some of the regulatory sides of things.
But I think these are extreme circumstances, and I agree that what you say, if we whatever, for instance, vote and say that we would support restaurants being able to use a parking for tables if that helps them, then let the governor and the mayor say, fine, we're going to waive regulations. I mean, what I've been reading, Cincinnati said, every restaurant automatically gets a 90-day permit to use parking spaces. So it will be up to them to defer.
So in like, for example, one of the hurdles is that
the regulations right now.
Well, in New York, what we might want to comment on is that, that instead of taking parking spots, it may be that we want them to take the whole sidewalk and have barriers actually out in the parking lot so people can walk around them. Because if people are taking the parking spots and you have the public walking through the middle, basically, of a serving area, that may not be comfortable in certain areas. So there's a lot of different. We want to provide alternatives, or this is one way, this is another way. So you could do both, because it's that's. And that the public walkway is what creates issues with a server carrying a plate of food. They're walking out into the street. Is that something that the Department of Health, what's their requirements for that? Can you even deliver to a table? Does somebody have to pick up? But we want to say, though, is that if somebody has a sidewalk cafe, that they, what happens if the place next door is a sidewalk cafe and the place next door to that? They're not going to have any extra room to extend too far and create social distancing. And, that then leads into the model of the Mulberry Mall and Dinner on 8th and stuff like that, where you can use a lot more space, that there's a little bit more equity. And so there's a lot of little different issues, but a lot of it is just saying that we're not against those types of issues, against those scenarios. And so, and also do it with the direction the industry is leading, going in, so that we're complementing them on that.
Right.
I think so much of this is predicated on trying to decipher what consumer behavior is going to be. I mean, we've all been, quarantined inside, and I don't think there's going to be this huge demand and rush right out the gate. And a lot of kind of what we're, it's like, to Susanna's point, like, we just kind of need to see what's going to happen, and then, have it loose enough that it's malleable to fit as we see that behavior change.
Yeah, and I don't know if anybody has had like somebody come into their place to repair something during this, and the uncomfortableness of just that scenario for a lot of people to then start thinking about, eating outside next to people close by. We have a long way to go in figuring out how people are comfortable in our community to go out and patronize our restaurants, particularly on the weekends, Friday, Saturday nights, Sunday afternoons, Saturday afternoons. And that's where we want to create enough leeway that all of us are comfortable just patronizing them, because I don't think that many people are coming in anytime soon. So.
On a totally different subject, because you were asking what other questions there were. Lennox Health Greenwich Village has offered to do another presentation, question and answer period, and I wonder if there's an interest on this committee to do that, and in which case you might work out the date.
Yeah, I think we can work out a date and maybe do it separately from, we could do it starting earlier in the evening before something else and just having it separate, because I think doing it with the exec is a little tight for people's time if they don't want to participate.
I think we had thought about a Wednesday, but you know what? If it's okay with you, I'll email you offline.
Yeah, sure.
Work out the date. I think it would be nice to hear from them. It's been a long time, and the scenarios are changing a lot. It'd be nice to know what's going on.
And anybody, Shirley?
Yeah, I just want to go back to what you announced in the first place about the task force from the police down Canal Street Way. And Janet had mentioned to me that she was there recently, and it didn't seem there was that kind of activity that would prevent what we are proposing for a temporary bike lane, because there, Janet, you can speak to that
Yeah,
more than
I
can.
walked the stretch right before our meeting, and there are a lot of parked cars. They're just parked at the curb. So, I mean, it's not as if their cars are on strange angles or taking up space. There's just a lot of cars at the curb. And they're mostly on the west side of the street. And what we're proposing is to bring the lane up on the east side so as not to interfere with the cars parked there, and left turn onto Watt Street. But I didn't see anything unusual. They're parallel parked.
Yeah, no, I think that what I had heard is they're coming in and out. That's where they get their assignments. So that at different times they're more than they're less, but that's their base for that group.
But that's on the west
that
side
mobile.
of the
Is
street.
there any way that we can check to see exactly what's going on there?
You know, it's on the west side.
No, I'm just saying, I mean, you know, if DOT works through it, I mean, but I'm just saying if they're there, I mean, if that's where they've set up shop, they'll probably just start a temporary bike lane a little further north. I'm just bringing that up as that's the, you know, or they'll move. I mean, that's depends on, you know, the politics of those two agencies working together. I mean, and that's,
The NYPD and DOT.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, because if the NYPD is using that as a mobile command post, and they've got their cars and doing assignments, they have extra cars that are parked there and whatever. I mean, I don't know how that, you know, at this time period, you know, they work together. They obviously don't do a great job of following parking rules, as we've seen on 12th Street and, you know, plenty of other areas. So,
Yeah, well, then I guess there's no harm at least proposing it and then seeing how they work.
oh, no, right. I'm just saying that I mean, it just might be that it's above Watts where things really get started.
Right.
I mean, again, it's like we don't want to put an impediment and just get as much as we can put in place. And this is for a temporary bike lane where we've recommended a permanent one.
Originally in 2016, we had asked for a permanent one. This one's temporary.
Okay, does anybody have any other business that they'd like to raise? Oh, and you know what? I did not. Akila is joining us tonight. Akila was not with us last week, but I just wanted to welcome you, Akila. I had welcomed all the other new board members, so welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And thanks for coming tonight. I see William is with us, and I'm thinking that we're going to set up a meeting probably around the executive committee meeting next week, but I haven't had a chance to discuss with everybody to see if to welcome all the new members and just go over things with you. Does anybody have any other new business that they'd like to raise? Anybody raise their hands?
Yes, for landmarks.
Oh, Chanel, yes.
I've taken an international interest, and a hotel has been built in Athens, 10 stories, that obscures people's view of the Parthenon, and the, I guess, City Planning Commission have ordered that 2 stories be removed.
Okay.
So we'll have similar steps.
Similar steps of removing. Yes, that's always good. Does anybody else have anything else they'd like to add in? Okay, great. Thanks, everybody. I think tonight's meeting was a little shorter, so hopefully that was a little better. All right.
Education tomorrow night.
Yes,
Did you want Dan and I to stay on for a second?
yeah, or I'll just call you guys up.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, actually, you know, Carter, I did have one thing while everybody else gets off.
Okay.
You know, next week they changed the advisory council meeting to Tuesday, which is going to be a conflict of our execs. So maybe when I write this letter, which I hope to do in the next day or so, maybe we just circulate it so we can get it ratified quickly, even before the executive. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Okay, so sure.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
So you'll give us a call later?
Yeah, I'll just call you up. Give me a few minutes. I'll call you up.
All right, no worries. Yep.
All right.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
See you soon.